Hello and welcome to the Herbs and Oils podcast brought to you by aromaculture.com. We are your weekly source for inspiring and educational conversations with leading herbalist and aromatherapist. I am your host, Jonathan Stewart. This episode is sponsored by Aromaculture Magazine. Are you interested in learning more about herbs and essential oils? Each issue of Aromaculture Magazine is packed with educational articles, case studies, and recipes written by practicing herbalists and certified aromatherapist. Stay tuned to the end of the podcast to find out more. Well, today's conversation is with author, herbalist, and natural chef Brigitte Mars. She has over 50 years experience, and you won't want to miss this conversation about herbal first aid and her book, The Natural First Aid Handbook. Hello, Brigitte, and welcome to the Aromaculture podcast. It's good to have you here with us today.
It is such my pleasure. Thank you very much to having me here, John, and your listeners. Welcome.
Sure. Well, I'm excited about our topic today around the natural first aid, and we'll be discussing your book, The Natural First Aid Handbook, which I've enjoyed reading through. But before we get into that conversation, I would like us to get to know you as a person just a little bit better. So to start off with, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what got you interested in herbalism?
Well, I grew up in upstate New York, but I had this wonderful grandmother in Canada, and she spoke French, and going to visit her was like going back 100 years in time. And to me, as a young child, it seemed like something out of a fairy tale, because she made soap in a cauldron in the yard, and her idea of ice cream was to put maple syrup on snow. We would also go and make maple syrup. But all my cousins and I, we would wear a medicine bag with cloves of garlic stuck in it. And I love these folk remedies. And, I would come home with my little clove of garlic, and my parents would say, "Why do you listen to that? Those are old wives' tales." And I would insist that they really worked, and that apple cider vinegar and honey was a much better remedy than getting a shot of antibiotics.
Sure.
I did not like shots as a child. But I think a big turning point, I must have been 3 or 4. My grandmother and I found a little wounded bird in the woods, and she picked it up, and we brought it into the house, and we treated it with an herbal salve that she had made, and we fed it special foods. I think flax seeds, actually. She was really big on les grains de lin, which we call flax seeds. And so I, decided I want to be able to do that. And so by the time I was 15 years old, I went to an all-girls boarding school where I probably didn't fit in that well, but I had such an interest in folk medicine that I sort of had a little business on the side. Not that I charged for it, but basically my classmates would come to my room and they'd say, "I've got cramps, I've got a headache." And I would say, "Here, try this tea. Let me put this on you and see if it helps." So basically I was experimenting on my classmates, and every time I had a paper or a special project to do for school, I would turn it into an opportunity to learn about herbs.
Awesome.
So if I was, studying English history, I would write about herbal medicine during the Renaissance period, or herbal medicine during the French Revolution, and write the paper in French. So that started it. And then my first job was managing a natural foods store in the Virgin Islands, and I helped to open up a natural foods restaurant in the Virgin Islands. But probably the biggest teacher for anything I've done was I lived for 2.5 years in the Ozarks and pretty much ate nothing but wild edible foods.
Yeah.
So that was great. And I did go to college, but I didn't learn about the herbs in college so much.
Sure. I think a lot of us are that way. You really learn life skills like that by living. So that's amazing. Who are some of the people that you feel like you learned from? You said your grandma, of course, early on, but who are some of the people that you would consider your mentors?
Well, when I moved to Boulder in 1977, I was going to massage school because I thought, I know about herbs, but it would be really good to learn about anatomy and physiology and pathology. And at the time, there was a wonderful herbalist teaching in Boulder named William Lassassier. So I sat at his feet for many months. And but over the years, I invited a number of herbalists to come and teach in Boulder. So I brought Michael Tierra, who was a very good teacher for me, Christopher Hobbs, Roy Upton, Susan Weed, Rosemary Gladstar came here, Kathy Kiville, Mindy Green. Of course, a lot of these people are my very good friends now. But when I worked at a natural food store called Alfalfa's Market, I just took this as the opportunity. Now, who do I want to study with next? Oh, I think I'll invite David Hoffman to come here. But those were some of my really big teachers. But I'd say William Lassassier and Michael Chiera were definitely huge inspirations in my life.
Definitely both wonderful people. And I think pretty much everyone you have talked about there, I've heard about, and they're all wonderful people. Could you tell us a little bit about what you're doing currently in your current work, and maybe even talk about the iPlant app that you created?
Well, I seem to keep myself really busy. I must like that. I think, when you get to a certain age, you think about, whoa, I better get this stuff done. So I'm writing a novel. Well, it's not really a novel. It's sort of autobiographical about the 60s and 70s. Yes, so I'm working on that.
Nice.
And I, if I do another herb book, it will be a wild edible plant book with really healthy recipes. I think a lot of the edible plant books, the recipes are add a cup of lard and 2 cups of sugar, and you've got pie or something,
Sure.
along with the stinging nettles. So I like that subject a lot. And I eat a lot of wild food still. And my phone app is called iPlant, and it just became available for Android. Just until recently, it was only available for iPhone. So I'm really excited about that. A couple of former Navy SEALs helped me design that because, they're prepared for, being lost in the wilderness or doing rescue. And I have great respect for my cohorts in that project. So check out iPlant. And otherwise, I do a lot of things. I work part-time at a pharmacy called Pharmaca, and there's 28 pharmacas around the country, and they do a great job of employing herbalists and naturopaths and acupuncturists and nutritionalists. So that's sort of my part-time job, but it works great for me because I just kind of fill in for people when they're absent or gone on holiday. And I have grandchildren. I collaborate a lot with my daughter, Rainbeau Mars, on projects and teaching. We taught together in Hawaii last year. But, this year looks great. I'm going to be teaching in the Bahamas and in Iceland and in Colombia. And so, every day my prayer really is that I want to make a positive difference on the planet. So I just offer my life to, teaching people to respect the plants, to learn about them. Don't spray them. Don't cover them up with rocks. They're really wonderful. Yes. So I'd say I'm on a mission, and I don't think I'll ever retire because it takes a long time to get good at this. But it's also a lot of fun. And I also have a private practice, and I do a lot of phone consultations, and I write occasional articles.
I can definitely tell by talking to you that you really enjoy what you do, and it also shows in your work. And we at Aromaculture really appreciate all the great articles you've written for us. We always love sharing your information with our people. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you. What a beautiful magazine Aromaculture is. It's just so artful. And I love seeing my friends who are writing for it as well. So yeah, you're doing a great job there.
Thank you. Yeah, we're blessed to have a lot of great authors. So always excited about that. Well, let's go ahead and we'll transition into the main conversation where I want to talk about a little bit of content in the Natural First Aid Handbook, and then we'll spend a lot of our time actually talking about what you should have in your actual herbal first aid kit. I was reading through as I was talking to Brigitte before we started recording, and as I was telling her, I love that it's a great reference tool, and it is that. It's something that I believe you should actually have with your first aid kit in case you need a quick reference for something, but it's also a really fun read. I recommend that our listeners buy this book and also just read through it, maybe even read through it every once in a while to refresh your memory, and then go ahead and create that first aid kit that she recommends in the book and that we'll talk about today. And then keep this book with that kit. It's going to be a great tool for you. It's not only first aid, but she talks about survival tips. I love that it talks about, the basic first aid stuff like stings, sprains, burns, allergies, fractures, how to handle some of those things. But my favorite chapter, I think, was surviving nature's challenges. And it talks about surviving a tornado, an avalanche. My favorite was how to survive a charging bull. That was kind of interesting and fun. And it's just really good information. So thank you so much for writing this great book. What was the inspiration behind the idea of this book?
Well, this is actually a revision of a book I wrote many years ago for Story Publications. And it's such an important topic because when you're in a first aid situation, if you don't know what to do, you might, just call 911 or do something that's totally the wrong thing to do, because first aid could be the difference between life and death. It could also be the difference between, is this person going to get healed from this really quickly, or is this going to be something that affects the rest of their life? And again, having been in situations of first aid, having been a mother and now a grandmother, I think it's really important. That old adage, be prepared, is so important. And if we're in the, business and art of helping to heal people with natural remedies, place where it really often counts is what you do in a crisis. And if you're prepared, you're going to act more appropriately. And, I will just say two things were really important for me. During my writing of the book, initially, we had a fire in our house. And, oh my God, there's a fire in the house. What do I do? And actually, I wasn't able to call 911 because the phone was dead.
Yeah.
And so I decided I was going to fight the fire, which is not the smartest thing to do. But it wasn't a huge fire. It was little, and I really thought I could do it. And I had tried to call 911, but then the phone went dead. This was before I didn't have a cell phone then.
Sure.
So two things I remembered, like, okay, I know that the lamp is what's on fire, and I'm going to throw water on the lamp. But I remembered, if you throw water on something electric that's plugged in, that could somehow cause a short that would cause the whole house to go up in flames right away.
Yes.
And then because it was very smoky, I think had I not been prepared, I might have thought, oh, I better open a window, which of course would have made the fire get a lot bigger. So I was really glad that I had known ahead of time what to do. And then when the fire department did arrive, they said, you totally did everything right. Please tell everyone that those halogen torch lamps are very dangerous fire hazards, because a lamp just burst into flames. So that was, really important to, how to act in an emergency and save my house. Of course, the smart thing to do is call 911. And I know everybody has cell phones now, but I was one of the last kids on the block to have one. So, things that happen like bee stings and bites. There's a story in my Natural First Aid Handbook about getting bit by a copperhead snake. And, usually you should go to the hospital, but this is when I was living at the teepee, and the nearest hospital was quite far, and we didn't have a phone at all back then. And so what do you do? And I, came across in one of my books that the Native Americans of that area had used echinacea, which was growing right where the snake was. So yes, going to the hospital is great, but because I've lived in the wilderness a lot, I've always said, well, I'm going to try this first. And it usually works. But believe me, I feel very strongly that I would do anything I could to protect my children or grandchildren. And if I was doing some action that wasn't helping, I would certainly get medical attention. But I've always said, try nature first. And it's been really kind. It's worked pretty well.
Yeah, I think that's a good philosophy for sure. So we don't have time to obviously cover the entire book, but I do want to take and just pull out a couple quick things that you would like to bring out about it. So the first I'd like to talk about is maybe give us 2 or 3 basic skills that are mentioned in the book that you believe everyone should make sure they know or they're comfortable with that could really save someone's life around them.
Well, I think it's very important to know how to do CPR. And I'm not going to attempt to tell people how to do CPR. I'm going to suggest that the book tells you how to do it. And if you took CPR years ago, it's changed. It has evolved. It's not so much now about mouth-to-mouth resuscitation as it is about chest compressions. So that's another reason why it's great that this book is new and evolved and has the latest information. But I would say if you have children, if you're a teacher, if you care for the elderly, take a CPR class every few years and get recertified or certified. But let's say something like a cut. What do you do when you get cut? I mean, that happens all the time. And a lot of people just say, oh, well, put a Band-Aid on it. But very often Band-Aids are kind of plasticky and they hold bacteria in.
Yeah.
And so if you just put a Band-Aid on it, maybe you don't think about the cut because it's wrapped up, but you want to prevent infection from happening. So it could be helpful to wash the cut. And I like having some kind of antimicrobial soap. I don't like the chemical kinds. I'm totally happy to use something like Dr. Bronner's peppermint or tea tree or lavender soap, which seems just right. All of those essential oils that are used to scent the soap are antimicrobial. And then apply a salve. And the word salve comes from the root word to save, salvare, to make whole. And so the book teaches you how to make a salve, but you can also buy salves at any natural food store or natural pharmacy. And I usually look for something that has soothing or healing herbs like calendula or comfrey, as well as some antimicrobial agents, maybe echinacea or golden seal, which I don't use too much because it's endangered in the wild, but let's say osha or neem, for example, and maybe scented with some kind of antimicrobial essential oil, lavender, tea tree, frankincense, something like that. And then if you're going to use a Band-Aid, I prefer using more gauze that allows the wound to breathe and then just taping the sides, if at all possible. So, that's a simple thing to do. But another thing that is good to know, for many of the upsets that occur in life, stomach distress, coming down with the flu or fever, or sore throat, the folk remedy of 2 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar and 2 teaspoons of honey stirred into a cup of water is great for a lot of things: headaches, sore joints, impending sickness, food poisoning. And so that's a really helpful little trick, just to try that. And of course, when we do have one of those ailments, it's good to look at, why is this happening? Is it because I've been not getting enough sleep, or I'm eating too much sugar, or I'm straining my voice? So I always think we should learn something from our illnesses. Even first aid situations might happen when we're moving too fast, when we're not trusting our intuition, when we're doing too many things at once. So it's been said that accidents happen as a way to get us to slow down. So, of course, the best thing is to prevent accidents. And I talk a lot about that in the book, too. Rather than treating a bug bite, how do you prevent them?
Very important advice, yeah, because it's always better to prevent it before the hand and not have to suffer through the emergency situation. So I do appreciate that part of the book, too, as I was reading through. Can we avoid this at the beginning? And if we can, then here, do this. But if we can't, then here's how you take care of it. I also love that you talked about, and I've seen this on the shelf and I haven't purchased it before, but you talked a lot about the rescue remedy. Could you talk a little bit about the rescue remedy and how that can be helpful?
Yes, rescue remedy is one of the Bach flower remedy combinations. Bach was a bacteriologist in the early 1900s. He was British, and he left a successful practice to go be with the flowers, and he would soak them in water and drink them. He would put them on his body. He would meditate with them. So, it sounds a little esoteric, but I'd have to say that rescue remedy is like a little miracle in a bottle. It's made from 5 different flowers. Let's see if I remember them: impatience for stress, cherry plum for despair, Star of Bethlehem, which is a flower in the lily family, not a star, which is the great comforter of sorrows. There's rock rose for terror and panic. And there's clematis for when you feel like you're not in your body. So these little bottles of rescue remedy, there's also a company called California Flower Essences that makes one called 5 Flower Remedy, which is basically a knockoff of the original. But 2 drops of rescue remedy taken in a glass of water or under your tongue is really good for stress, trauma. And it's one of those things I say, don't leave home without it, because you can use it for fear or panic. I've given it to people who were having a panic attack. I've given it to someone on an airplane who was afraid of flying. and the plane was really bumpy. I've used it when I was having an argument. Okay, let's keep fighting, but we'll each take a couple drops of rescue remedy. And then the argument continued a lot more peacefully. I was a little angry at my daughters. They went and got tattooed when they were very underage. I
Yeah.
can't believe the tattoo artists believed they were 18. But when they came home with their new tattoos, they said, Mom, we took rescue remedy. Like, I'm supposed to be happy that they do that. Like, yes, getting tattoos is traumatic and you're only 12 years old, but it doesn't seem to have hurt them any. But so rescue remedy, heartbreak, grief. You've been crying all night. You're going through relationship stuff, but you've got to go and work in the morning and look somewhat normal. And it's such a small little thing. I love this. And if you're a caregiver and maybe you're treating someone's burn or cut or wound, you might want to take it as well, because it can be a little unsettling for the person who's not a paramedic to, have to deal with blood and pain and all that, to see it in one of your loved ones. So when you take it, you feel like, wow, this really does something. Even though it's just made from flowers soaked in spring water and then bottled with a little bit of brandy as a preservative.
Yeah, I love that. And a lot of times the mental battle is one of the hardest battles. The trauma around the actual accident, a lot of times it's a mental deal. It seems like rescue remedy can really help with that. And that's huge for getting the situation under control. Well, let's go ahead and let's transition into the main part of the conversation, and we'll spend some time about actually building a first aid kit, what should be in that kit. Can you help us and kind of guide us through how you would recommend and maybe what you would recommend us put in our herbal first aid kit?
Absolutely, John. Well, because you and I both love working with essential oils, I will say there's 3 essential oils that are must-haves in your first aid kit. And of course, as you get into this, you'll want to have more. But if you have peppermint oil, that is cooling to a burn. Smelling it can be very uplifting and reviving if you feel faint, for example. 1 drop of peppermint oil. People are kind of not always in agreement about how essential oils can be used internally. So my preference would be to use peppermint tea. But sometimes when you're traveling, you don't have access to make tea. So 1 drop of peppermint oil could help to settle an upset stomach. Some people might want to dilute it in olive oil. So that's a good one. But tea tree oil is a first aid kit in a bottle. And I do know that I used to date a Marine, and he said the Marines all carried a bottle of tea tree oil. So if you had tea tree oil, you could do so many things with it. You could apply it to a wound to help prevent infection. And, I teach sometimes in the tropics, and things that might not be a big deal in more northern climates. If you're in a climate where it's hot all the time and bacteria is thriving all year round and doesn't kind of get frozen ever, a little cut can easily turn into a much more serious infection. So applying tea tree oil would be very good. You can put tea tree oil on a bug bite. You can also use it as an insect repellent. I know that many schools have epidemics with head lice and all those itchy, creepy, crawly things. Adding some tea tree oil to your shampoo, to your soap, to your conditioner, to a final hair rinse can help prevent lice infestation. You can mist tea tree oil or use it in a diffuser to help prevent the spread of infection or contagion. So it's in the same family as eucalyptus, the Myrtaceae family. The other essential oil I would have would be lavender, which smells a little nicer than tea tree oil, but you can use it much the same way. It's quite safe for pimples, for bug bites, for bug repellent, for smelling salts, to add to a salve to prevent infection, also cooling to a burn. So those 3 essential oils, peppermint, lavender, and tea tree, would certainly be part of the first aid kit. I would also have a little bottle of rescue remedy. I would probably have some echinacea tincture, which is one of the great antimicrobial herbs. Echinacea can be used for both viral and bacterial infections. It is safe during pregnancy. You can use it internally and topically. And, if it's in an alcohol tincture, it's going to last for years. So that is a wonderful thing to have. And sometimes if you're in a foreign country, you may not have access to these things. So it's really good if you're going to spend thousands of dollars to go on a trip somewhere to be prepared so you don't end up spending your trip, having to be on antibiotics or, going to the hospital or something, or being
Sure.
somewhere where you don't speak the language. So a salve, echinacea, and some arnica pellets, which is a homeopathic remedy. And arnica is really good for trauma, physical trauma. So if you got bonked or you got bruised and you're trying to reduce inflammation, swelling, black and blue bruising, arnica is going to really help. And a lot of my friends who are surgeons even recommend it to shorten the duration it takes to heal after surgery. So that's a start, maybe some Band-Aids. So if you have that, and all of that could fit into a really small little box, and sure, you could add to it, but the best way to get acquainted with natural first aid is to be prepared, have these things in the house, because if there's a crisis, the last thing you want to be doing is driving across town or waiting in line at the health food store and finding out you have to go somewhere else. You want to have what you need in the home so that you're ready to take action.
Definitely. And I like that particular list of stuff. That's a kit that you could easily have in your backpack, purse, be ready to go no matter where you are. And then I know you also talk about if you were going to have a fuller kit that you would actually keep in your house, are there a few things that you would add to that, something that was maybe a little bit more larger of a kit that would cover more things?
Sure. Well, I want to remind people that we have a lot of first aid supplies in our kitchen too.
Sure.
So always having things like apple cider vinegar and honey, which I mentioned earlier, that you could take a couple of teaspoons each and stir it into a cup of water. That is very good. I've also used things like cabbage leaves for a poultice. For example, like sore knees or sore back or infected breasts in nursing mothers, mastitis. So that's a good thing. But let's say in your home first aid kit, having some ginger capsules would be good for nausea and digestive distress. You could also use ginger capsules after vomiting. It'll help to settle your stomach. And then, of course, knowing, what are some of the proclivities of your family. But another really important thing is cayenne pepper, which you can have in capsules, works well. Cayenne pepper can be applied topically to a wound. I know that sounds really painful, but it really isn't. You just don't want to get it near your mucous membranes. But cayenne pepper can stop bleeding, and it also is a folk remedy. Now, of course, if someone's having a heart attack, you should call 911, but what do you do in the meantime? If the person is conscious, swallowing 2 cayenne capsules will improve circulation and help transport oxygen throughout the body. So I think that's a really important thing as well. There's also a remedy that is not so popular in this country, but it really deserves to be. It's called ume concentrate, UME. Also, there's a form of it called umeboshi plum paste. And this is a sour, or in the case of umeboshi, sour and salty paste. And you just stir a little bit into water, and this will settle your stomach from food poisoning. It's also really good when traveling to prevent parasitic invasion, like, tapeworm and giardia and stuff like that. So that's another one of my don't leave home without it things. So yeah, if you have small kids, be ready with the arnica, but it doesn't have to be huge. And
Sure.
Then you can, grow it as you see needed. And I certainly have a big first aid kit, because I think people think I have all kinds of things ready to treat the masses. And because I work at Pharmaca, I also bring home a lot of samples, and I really love trying things. So being your own practitioner, where you actually try stuff out on yourself, is really good preparation.
For sure. I think the cayenne pepper, when I was reading through the book and what you just discussed, I thought that was really interesting. I was not aware that it stopped bleeding. So that's an interesting thing. I was aware of yarrow and some of the more common ones there, but I have a bunch of cayenne at the house. We love cayenne, so that's handy to have around. And I love, like you mentioned, that we can use things like the apple cider vinegar, like the cabbage, the things like cayenne, the ginger, things that we already have around the house. So it didn't have to be a huge kit.
Yeah, and baking soda and apple cider vinegar mixed together into a paste is great to apply to things like chicken pox and poison ivy. And but of course, great love for me is seeing what's growing outside. And, I'm just as likely as you perhaps are, John, to use yarrow or shepherd's purse or one of the herbs that might be growing. But of course, in the winter, you're not going to find them under the snow. So
True, for sure. I know one of the ones that grows all over the place that we love to use is plantain. My wife had gotten stung by some stinging nettle, and she looked over and there was some plantain on the ground. She mashed that up, macerated it, put it on, and within a few seconds, the pain went away. And it's amazing what you can do just with the common weeds that grow around you. And so that's good to know as well.
And, another thing is with the case of poison ivy, very often the remedy is growing right next to it.
Yeah.
So poison ivy, there's plantain. I get bit by the snake, there's echinacea. And that's one of the beauties of natural medicine is you learn that nature is so wise in what it provides. And very often what you need is right there. Here, I live in Colorado. So the higher up you go, the more herbs you have that help your respiratory capacity to be able to breathe in a thinner oxygen environment.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So in your kit, obviously you're going to have some things that are just single herbs or whatever, but can you talk about maybe some of the ones that you could actually make, maybe a salve or a different tincture, maybe a few of the processes you could use to make your own remedies for your first aid kit?
Well, a really easy thing to make is a tincture. And tinctures last for years. Susan Weed likes to say, if you make a tincture in alcohol, you can give it to your grandchildren's grandchildren. So
nice.
That's really amazing. So tinctures basically are a great way to preserve the properties of a fresh plant for the winter, because as you were saying, what are you going to do in the winter? So let's say there's a wonderful herb like yarrow and you have it growing in your yard. According to the traditions of my grandmother, I love to collect my plants around the time of the full moon. And then I will either chop them up or put them in the blender with some either vodka or brandy. I tend to use vodka. And I want to use a generous amount of herbs so that the finished product, the chopped up yarrow or the blended yarrow, is in a glass jar now, and it's covered with maybe half an inch of vodka. Now, of course, you might think, oh, yeah, the vodka. Well, that's the answer to everything. But you could also make tinctures with apple cider vinegar or vegetable glycerin, which would be a good idea if you're pregnant or nursing or have a history of alcohol abuse or simply don't want to use alcohol. However, the tinctures in apple cider vinegar or vegetable glycerin will not have as long a shelf life. They'll probably last more a couple of years. So basically, you let the herbs macerate in your liquid, either the vodka or the vinegar or the glycerin, at least for a month. And you shake it up every day, and it's really nice. I like to put them on the windowsill and shake it up every day and just put my loving intentions into that. And then the next full moon, strain it. And I often use a paint strainer bag, which you can squeeze really, really tight. And then you have the liquid. So the pulp that's left over is called the marc, and that you can compost. And then the liquid you put in those little 1 ounce dropper bottles that you can find at the health food store, and then label it, because you may not remember in 6 months what was in that bottle. And now you're building your first aid kit and using the bounty of what nature's offered you during the spring, summer, and fall. So I would certainly have some yarrow tincture also to stop bleeding. And it was used by midwives for thousands of years to help prevent postpartum hemorrhaging. Yarrow would also be good to take for a cold or a flu or a fever. So tinctures are easy to make. Salves involve heating and heating the herbs in oil and then straining it and then adding beeswax and melting the beeswax. It's a little bit messy, but I do talk in the book about how to make salves. So basically it's oil, herbs, and then something to thicken it, like beeswax is usually used. And then you make these little containers. But to be honest, it's really messy to make salves. I tend to do it once a year when I teach my class how to do it, and I make enough for the whole year and give it away. But you can do it. It's not impossible. But if you're going to do it, you might as well make a year's supply. You don't want to be making a salve while your child is sitting in the kitchen floor screaming. You want to be ready with these things.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. I do encourage everyone listening, go out and purchase the Natural First Aid Handbook. We'll make sure we have a link available in the show notes. Definitely pick up the book. It's an inexpensive book, right around that $13 US price point. It's something I believe every person should have with them. They should read through it and refresh their mind on the different things talked about in the book. So thank you for all that. If somebody were wanting to further their first aid education a little bit, obviously I'm not talking about becoming a medical professional, but is there somewhere that you would recommend people maybe to take the next step? They've read through your book, they've maybe signed up for a CPR class, as you talked about. Is there any other resources or education that you would have them look towards?
Well, learning about herbs and natural healing is something you can study your entire life. So I would certainly start out by reading, and I'm a big believer in highlighting in yellow what I read and see what's available locally. Maybe there's a natural food store or an herb store or even a gardening store that's teaching classes. Go on herb walks. Very often nature centers or places like that, wilderness areas, will offer nature walks so you can learn the names of some of the plants. I've always thought that one of the best ways to learn a subject well is to offer to teach a class on it. As soon as I put myself out there, sure, I can teach a class on, plant poisons, which I did for a mystery writers group, which I knew nothing about. But
Nice.
3 months from now, I knew all about plant poisons. But there's so much on YouTube. There's correspondence classes. Um, Tap into some of the wisdom of the elder people in your community. Sometimes they can offer great wisdom. I know for me, I learned a lot about herbs while I was living in the teepee from an elderly woman who many of us would say was a hillbilly, but boy, was she wise and knew so much about plants. And she's really who got me going. And I remember the great revelation I got from her was that most of the weeds in the garden are edible and medicinal plants. So I started seeing the garden rather than a chore where I have to be weeding and sweating in the sun. I could be working on collecting plants for lunch or dinner at the same time that I'm making room for the tomatoes. So keep learning your whole life. I love how available information is. I have a YouTube station, Brigitte Mars, where I have lots of little tutorials. I also have a wonderful newsletter. So hopefully some of the listeners will go to brigittemars.com and sign up for my newsletter. And then you get little YouTubes and recipes and remedies and how-tos all the time. It's quite fun.
Yes, definitely. I was spending a little time before this conversation on Brigitte's website, and there is a lot of good information there. Great blog, a lot of resources, videos. And one of the things I thought was interesting is that you're also a natural chef, a natural food chef. So there was a lot of great recipe videos on there. So definitely encourage our listeners to go over to brigittemars.com. And then also one of the things that we always publish in the magazine with her articles that she writes is Brigitte, and she mentioned this a little bit, she teaches a lot of classes around, and I know she has a lot of events coming up in the Boulder area. And so make sure that you go to her website and check out where she's going to be, and maybe you could attend a class that she's teaching. Maybe even go somewhere fun like the Bahamas or somewhere like that if you wanted to travel, have a vacation as well. But she's doing a lot of classes, so definitely take advantage of that. Is there anything in closing that you'd like to leave with our audience, Brigitte?
Be prepared. Have your first aid kit ready. I guess the one thing I'd like to say when I'm given an opportunity is we really need to respect the water on our planet more. And a saying I heard years ago, and I really kept it, is if you have water to throw away, throw it on a plant. It might be a mint plant or a raspberry bush outside the front door, but we just really need to respect water more because so many people on the planet do not have access to clean water. And so I love that little saying. If you have water to throw away, throw it on a plant. If you're using natural things, you can take bath water or water from your shower and, give it back to nature because we're all in it together and our population is growing and we all have to find ways that we can survive and thrive and help respect this beautiful planet that we've been given to live on.
Yes, we do. Well, thank you so much, Brigitte. I know that will be very helpful to those who listen to this podcast. I know I learned a lot, not only reading through your book, but also talking to you right now. And I appreciate everything you do for the industry.
Thank you so much. Peace and blessings to all of you. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to that great conversation we had with Brigitte. As a reminder, please subscribe to the podcast so you'll know when new episodes are published every week. And also, if you're enjoying this podcast, please make sure to share it with your friends and to leave us a review. And as I mentioned in the intro, this podcast is brought to you by Aromaculture Magazine. If you're interested in learning more about herbs and essential oil, then you should check out Aromaculture Magazine. It is packed with educational articles, case studies, and recipes written by practicing herbalists and certified aromatherapists. Our most recent January issue has over 16 amazing articles from 13 different professional herbalists and aromatherapists, and it's all about the subject of digestive health. You can purchase individual issues for $6.99, or if you subscribe, you will get your monthly issue delivered to your inbox every month for a discounted rate of $5.99 each issue. To learn more, go to aromaculture.com and click Magazine. The information presented in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not meant to replace professional medical advice. Please consult your doctor if you are in need of medical care or before making any changes to your health routine. Until next week, keep spreading the herbal love.